So,
I'm not sure we can hear the audio. Steve, if you can share your audio as well.
I can't hear that very well.
Figure out which services might be able to meaningfully impact your business. We also want to help tell your story. So if you're building something cool, we want to know about it and help spread that message to the world. So you might end up on stage at an event like AWS Summit. If you're a startup, you should also definitely check out the AWS Lofts. These are event spaces that are free to anyone with an AWS account. You can treat them like co-working spaces, but the awesome thing about them is that we also have people like technical evangelists like myself, solutions architects that come and give hands-on technical workshops and sessions to help you learn how to more effectively utilize the AWS products and platforms that you're already building on top of.
We are a dedicated team of people that love startups, that we just want to come and help you with whatever we can, whether it be technical or business focused. We are here to help guide you and make sure that you do have a say in what's going on. We do get your feedback. We do bring that feedback to the service teams. That is what we're here for.
so hello everybody. Welcome to the first SG Virtual here in Luxembourg. And a few housekeeping notes. You are all put on mute, but you can use the chat in order to ask your questions. These sessions will be recorded, and if you don't like to have your face seen, just stop your video. But without further ado, we would like to thank our partners, especially AWS for this month's mentorship month, and our local partners, mainly BPM, which are important during this time in order to get your orders delivered. CMS Law, if you need any advice on legal purposes. Fox Beer, especially with this sunny weather, to get a little bit of refreshment. And by the way, their sparkling wine, All de Crémant, is sold out, but don't fear, they have a new one which you can order now. And finally, MixVoice, if for remote purposes you need phone, voice, or video conferences, you can get them free or on their Mix PBX. But without further ado, let us introduce our fireside host, the chat person this month, Richard Russell. So, Richard, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, very well, thanks. It is a lovely sunny day. Unfortunately, my office is in a basement, in my home basement, and so I see the sun coming in through an English window, but that's about it.
So that's fine. And how are you living with this confinement? Do you enjoy it, or do you see new business opportunities there?
Well, it's a mix. So currently, I'd say that my experience of living is not much different of what it normally is, in that I spend a lot of time at home, my home office doing work from home anyway. I have been working on a bunch of client leads that we're going to turn into in-person workshops. Clearly, they've all stopped. One of them in particular was a cruise line. Another one was an airline. So both of those, not only can I not do an in-person workshop, but they're not having any business at all at the moment. But that'll pick up again soon, I hope. And in the meantime, I'm working on a separate project called New Makata, which is a listing site for local businesses who have offer delivery and pickup. So I'm just working on a separate idea there. But yeah, so things have changed in many ways. In practice, it hasn't changed that much, except that the kids are home, so I have to look after the kids in the afternoon. My mother-in-law looks after them in the morning. But other than that, it's actually not that much different for me in strange ways. My wife is at home as well. She's working full-time, but she's now working from home.
So it will be strange. A lot of people say either we will have a baby boom afterwards, or the divorce rate will go up. So let's see about that.
Well, we'll be contributing to one of those because my wife's pregnant and due in July. So
Whoa.
I'm hoping that we get through this whole process and everything is safe, and we come out. I don't want her to get ill while she's pregnant because there's all sorts of risks with that. But by the time July comes around, I'm hoping that the hospital is relatively safe and empty.
Yeah, I would say that's fine. So why are you here today? Let's say so. Richard, tell us a little bit, where do you come from? How did you arrive to Luxembourg?
Yeah, so I'm Australian. You may hear from the accent, you may not. But I grew up in Australia in Adelaide, which is where all the good wine in the world comes from. It's a big wine growing district at least. And so I grew up there, and I didn't even have a passport until I was 26 or thereabouts. And when I was 26, I got a job offer from a local company that was contracted to Deutsche Bank in London. And I had 2 weeks to get myself a passport, move out of my flat, hand over my jobs, and all sorts of things and various other things that I was doing, and go to London for a temporary period of time. It was only supposed to be temporary, like a month or so, and then back in Adelaide to work remotely. But we ended up working on and off in London for about a year, and then I got British right over boat because my mum's British, so I could live there. And then I got hired by the client, and I was in London. And I was in London for 10 years, and I worked for Deutsche Bank again for a couple more years, and then Google for 6 years in London. And I became a British citizen, which means I'm European, or I was. And then I did a couple of startups. I did my own startup where I learned a lot and didn't succeed, but I learned a great deal from it. And I joined another startup where I was, it had some success in the opposite direction, but failed spectacularly, as in I went bankrupt. Then I got a job in Amazon in Luxembourg, and my wife was working for Amazon in London at the time, but we just had our first child. And so we were looking for a place to move to. What do we do? Where do we? Should we? Can we move to Europe? We'd like to move to Europe, and we looked for places that have Amazon offices that she could get a transfer, where they have a lot of English speaking, and lots of business and opportunities. And so we looked at Munich, Milan, Madrid, Paris, and all of those countries are great, except that as a monolingual person, it's very, very hard. And so we came to Luxembourg, and it was a good opportunity, and I got a job at Amazon, and I ran Amazon multilingual translation. So if you go to Amazon DE, it now works in English and Polish and Dutch, Turkish and Czech, I think. And that was my project, among other things. And I did that for 2 years or thereabouts, and decided that I'd really had enough of Amazon. It was a good company in many ways, but it's not. It was very operational work, and I'm more of a strategic person. And so I left and decided to become a consultant, and I've been consulting ever since for startups here and for corporates, and doing more and less work. It depends on how things go. It's been an interesting journey for the last couple of years, but I've been a startup coach at Fit for Start, and I've done some work with Luxair, and I've done some work with Vodafone and IKEA and Post and a few others.
But if you look back, let's say so, you had some entrepreneurial, how shall I say, you had some entrepreneurial experience yourself, and then you joined Google in the UK, if I understood well.
Yeah.
How was that move, or the other way around, Google and then entrepreneurial? It doesn't matter, but is it really that those companies, how shall I say, nurture this entrepreneurial spirit, which we all are looking to?
So in a sense, yes. Like if you're in a traditional company, like when I was at Deutsche Bank, it was very traditional, and there wasn't any entrepreneurial spirit. There wasn't any real drive to do different things. It was more just produce, and focus in the work that you're doing, and someone else will come up with the ideas. Google was a lot more flexible in terms of you have 20% time and you can come up with an idea and you can do something. It has a massive plus in the sense that it opens up your mind to be able to have ideas and to just think broader. What it does though is it also has a problem. Everyone who exits Google, I find, has a sense of arrogance. And this arrogance is not necessarily, there's two types of arrogance here. There's just arrogance as in I'm wonderful, and there's a lot of that at Google, and hopefully I didn't get too much of that. But there's the arrogance of I know the right answer, I have the right idea. And so especially at Google, if you launch anything, you could launch anything at all. You can have a website that has a button on it that goes squeak when you click it. And if you launch it, then you'll get 100,000 or 2 million people clicking on this button. And it's very, very hard for Google to figure out whether it's successful or not, because we have 50 million users all using this not very successful product, but that's 50 million users. So now what? And whereas as a startup, you have the opposite problem. So you come out of Google thinking, I'll just launch this thing and everyone's going to love it. Actually, no one even finds out about it, let alone decides whether they love it. So then you have to go through the process of, how do I get people to find out about this thing, this idea that I've had? How do I market this thing? How do I even get people to hear about it? And then when they don't respond, as in, like, the natural response is not, oh, Google's done a thing, I'll go and check it out. The natural response is, some random guy has done a thing and I don't like it. and so then you don't get the feedback. And so this whole process was a really big learning experience for me. What I really discovered, I mean, my first startup was a mobile loyalty product. So for coffee shops, and so if you come across Yolti here, similar to Yolti, but a bit different, as in it was all GPS based, and so you'd walk into the shop, and then the tablet would go ding, and it would have your face and name, and then they'd be able to say, "Hi, you must be Richard. Would you like your regular cafe latte, or would you like a free muffin today?" That kind of thing, because you have a loyalty system, and you could attach payments, you could do all sorts of things. It was like a cookie. But it's like when you go to Amazon and it says, "Hi Richard, welcome back," and it shows you all of your recommendations. But you can imagine that working at a store, and it worked really, really well, except that nobody cared. And so, like, if I convinced a barista to use it, then when I walked in the door, they'd see it and they'd click on it, and it would work really well. But no customer walking in the door would ever look at it and say, "I think I'll install this." I have a problem because you don't know me, barista. I have a problem because I'm carrying too many loyalty cards, and I don't want to carry my loyalty cards, because realistically they only carry one or two. They just don't carry the other ones. The barista is busy, and the managed coffee shop manager are busy, making sure they have milk, and making sure they're hiring and firing the right staff, and they have the license for their music, and that the place is clean, and managing timetables and so on. And somewhere like 35th on their list is loyalty cards and improving the loyalty relationship. And so they didn't care either. So I couldn't convince anyone to do it. I eventually realized that if I went to a Starbucks or someone like that, I could possibly get someone to pay attention. And so Starbucks has done, and Costa and these chains have done something in this direction. But that ended up being a very different problem. And I realized at that stage that I didn't care about those people because I don't like Starbucks. So, so then I realized that, well, I'm trying to solve a problem. I've got a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And the people who do have this problem, I don't really want to help them. So this is a pointless exercise. So I stopped. But it was a really interesting learning experience for me to learn about how my own arrogance and my own belief in my idea can distract me from reality, and to discover that, okay, that doesn't work.
And how did you move that forward? I mean, okay, that you had that one, you had that experience, and then you had this corporate environment as well, which was not really a corporate environment if you compare it to our European way of looking at it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Amazon. Would you say that this, when you came to Amazon here in Luxembourg, it was the same vibe you felt in the UK? Because your partner, as I understood, she was in Amazon UK.
Yeah.
If I understood. Was it the same vibe, or was it because, if it was different, was it eventually because you were in different departments?
Yeah, so it has a lot of similarities. If you compare, like, certainly since Amazon, I've been involved in lots more traditional companies. I've had some exposure to Post, to IKEA, to Luxair, to Vodafone, and so on. And I'd say that Amazon has a lot more in common with Google than those other companies do. But there are some really significant differences. And the biggest difference that I see is that is captured in their hiring process or hiring philosophy. So, and the way I'd summarize that is that if you're hiring at Google, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm looking for people who are really smart, and they probably get a lot of work done. And I'll try and get people to do work, but I want really smart people. And I'll hire those smart people. I'll make them happy, and I'll give them some challenges, and I'll give them flexibility and freedom, and then good things will happen. And that's Google's hiring philosophy, and that really defines Google's culture in many ways, because you do have a lot of smart people who like to tell everyone else how smart they are. And when you put them all in one room, it becomes quite vocal. If you go to Amazon, Amazon's hiring mentality is different. It's, let's hire people who get a lot of things done. And we'll try and get the very smart people as well, but we'll try and get people, focus on people who get a lot of things done. And then the environment that they do is like we put them in a place where they get challenged and they get pushed and they get they grow and they have opportunity to grow. But it's all about the getting things done and product and producing and so on. So and there's no, if you look at Amazon, has some really wonderful aspects to its culture. But if you look at its leadership principles, there's no leadership principle there which is about employee happiness or employee work-life balance or anything like that. So and that's, I mean, to be fair, it's criticism, but at the same time, it is what it is, and that they attract people who are on the workaholic side, let's say, and then they reward that behavior, and so they get a lot of things done. So if I was hiring someone now, I'd choose to hire someone from Amazon because they get a lot of things done, and that's really important. If I was going to work somewhere, I'd choose to work at Google because it's more pleasant.
And if you go look at it like that, let's say you have a company, there's a company in Luxembourg, an SME, bigger one, or I don't know, they are there, either they are, you can even say a startup, an SME, any stage. Would you say that here in Luxembourg, the time you have been here, you have noticed that the client-customer relationship has become more looked at, more worthwhile for the companies? Or would you say, okay, that they're still, it's not a diaspora, but it's still lacking a little bit, like that the customer or the client is the one you deliver the service, you send the invoice, and you hope that you get paid?
Yeah, you're talking about customer centricity in Luxembourg, I guess. And so what I find here is that in startups and in corporates, like Amazon here is its own little world because it's basically a microcosm of Amazon elsewhere, and it's not particularly Luxembourgish in any particular way. So it's very American like that. But other companies here are a bit more European, a bit more Luxembourgish, a bit more French, a bit more German. And so they have differences. And certainly I do find that like there are some industries where the whole industry is less client focused. I won't be naming particular companies because that wouldn't be good for my company. But I mean, they're a little less client focused, partially because clients have less choice. Now, if a client can just choose to go somewhere else, like if I'm using Google Search, I can choose to use Bing, and I just go there. So they have to compete on that level. If I'm using Google Maps, I can choose to use Bing Maps. I can use Apple Maps. If I'm using Android, well, it's not that hard to move to iPhone. So there's a lot of competition there. So these companies have to obsess over customers, and they're forced to. If you're a bank, people don't move banks very often. So banks don't need to be very client centric, and they do need to be very risk averse. And so there's a lot of businesses here that are less risk averse fundamentally, but then even within their environments and their ways that they're doing things, even the startups that I see that do need to be customer centered are often not. And it's partially because in Luxembourg, we don't have a very well established or well developed marketing skill set here. We have people who are largely, like if you look at the whole Luxembourg population, including all the expats, a lot of the business here is administrative and back office and process driven, or else it's relational. So it's relationship banking and things like that, and that is client centric, but it's a different kind of client centricity. We're not looking at an audience. We're looking at my relationship with this person and my relationship with that person. And so I'm not changing my product. I'm changing my relationship. Whereas
would you say, what do you think is easier, to change the relationship with your client customer, or to adapt the product or service, knowing that if you try to change the relationship, there's also a trust question and the trust aspect about it?
Yeah, well, so it really depends on the business itself, right? So there are many businesses where the customer is actually there because they have a relationship, and a lot of private banking, for example, is in that category where we are there because we have a relationship, and it's based on that, and it's based on the flexibility of a somewhat independent banker who can do things for me. And so if you just change that, it's harder. Certainly, if you just look more generically across startups and businesses with digital product or the digital channel, changing the product is always harder than changing a relationship. And so if you have a scale, any sort of the way you scale with your customers, if your relationships are based on people, you basically have to change the salesperson or the relationship manager or train them to do something different, and then it happens. And that's all you have to do, really. It's easy and hard because you've got a person to change,
Mm-hmm.
and scaling it is really hard because you've got to change 50 people. But if you're changing a product, it's usually slower to change it, and it requires a bit more momentum to change it, but it has a much bigger leverage effect
Mm-hmm.
because you changed the product once and you've changed it for 50,000 users all at once, and hopefully you have a lot of data about that.
But and the other way, I mean, luckily in Luxembourg, since over, let's say, in the last 15 or 20 years, we had this hype or buzz going on about entrepreneurship and so on. And okay, some of them are still there, others not. That's another question. But going to that point, do you see, from your experience you have here in Luxembourg and with your clients and so on, and also for the Fit for Start, do you see more product-based companies coming up here in Luxembourg or more service-based ones?
Oh, I don't know. Like, I mean, let me think. I've always, to be honest, I've always found that the differentiation a little hard to get my head around. Partially because I worked in an environment where we talk about the product, but the product is a service.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's more the mentality. I certainly see a lot of development of the mentality of thinking about products, and I think that that's necessary. And I see that with the people who are providing a service, they're productizing that service and turning that service into something that can be defined and scaled, and you can change the definition and have an impact on your customers. So I do see that happening, and I see a lot more product management. I actually started a product manager meetup. And it was recently sort of, it's also recently started as being Product Tank Luxembourg, although its first event was cancelled for obvious reasons. So, but hopefully that'll get going again. And there is a growing community here of product managers, and there are companies like Dockler that have a lot of product managers. Amazon is slowly, like, people who leave Amazon are ex-product managers, so if they stay here, they have that skill set. There are more startups that have a product mentality. So I'm seeing that, but I'm not seeing a lot of established companies really understanding the product mentality, even when they should have. They really struggle to move from a project mentality to a product mentality. And really that comes down to delegation and how much trust we put in our product managers.
But on the other hand, I mean, I sometimes have the feeling that a lot of companies, SMEs, startups, or those in the growth phase, once they have the product or the service going on and they are going to market it and they have their first clients, they're paying, they send invoices, they got the invoices paid and so on, that there's eventually sometimes they have the head so in the business that they do not look further, that they do not look, how can I develop my business further, that they are more managing the momentum.
That's common in many ways. That's common everywhere. I mean, every person's natural way of operating is to look at the tornado that you're in, right? That chaos.
Yeah, exactly, and to get out as a gorilla.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going on. I've got to deal with this. I've got to do all that. They're all the urgent things because customers are asking this question, that question, the other question. Got to serve that customer, this customer, the other customer. And it's very hard to step back out of that. It takes quite a lot of discipline, especially on behalf of management. I don't think that we have a really mature product or marketing or even management here in a lot of Luxembourg, and I think that can develop quite a lot. And I do see companies working on this and doing things. I mean, there are people in this space working on it, both in the startup world and even in the corporate world with Founder and others as well. So there are companies doing this, and it is changing, but it's slow, and it's definitely slower than London, for example.
Okay. And on the other hand, I mean, one thing you're also doing, or mainly doing, is you take your experience you had from the so-called corporate world, and you are offering this service, this knowledge, this experience to companies here in Luxembourg. How is it that, do they accept it, or do you have to do a lot of legwork and preparatory work beforehand?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, what people in Luxembourg are interested in generally tends to be project work and performing a role. And the role is often much more of a project manager or a consultant. And they understand particularly more established companies, understand understand project manager, and they understand consultant, and they understand software developer, but they don't really understand product manager. And product manager is very hard to do in any situation. It's very hard to do as an external anyway, because it's so tightly bound to the product strategy, right? You're actually talking about strategy here. But I do find that companies here tend to think of the strategy as something that happens at the top, and we think of a strategy. Sometimes it happens at the mid-management, goes up to the top and then comes down again. But it's a management function, and then the project or the product gets done by people who are executing, and you're not getting the connection between the strategy and what are we trying to deliver, who are our clients, and what do they want, and how do we deliver something to them, and how do we measure that, and how do we implement that, and how do we prioritize that. That's the function of a product manager, and that really ends up being a strategic function, right? It ends up being really, what's the strategy of the company? But because you're often not having that conversation with the people who are in control, it's very hard to do it. And especially as an external, it's hard to do anyway in the best of environments. But as an internal, it's not even happening in many cases.
Okay, great. So we have a few attendees today. As this is a virtual one, and it's the first one, so we are trying out a few things. Either you can raise your Q&A in the chat, or if you like, we can give you the floor and then you can ask it. So for those who like to raise it in the chat, just go ahead. And if you want to tell it verbally, just let us know. But in the meantime, we are waiting for some questions. So let's go ahead a little bit. So Richard, you also told us that you just have done a quick and dirty one, trying to set up a project, New Mercato. Is that
New Mercato? Yeah, New
Mercato. What's that about?
Yeah, so basically, what I saw is that I saw a few things. I saw on a self level, all my clients disappearing because they don't want to have in-person workshops and innovate. What I tend to do, what we sort of were just talking about in terms of like the product managing stuff, I ended up turning this into more of a consulting or a training piece about skills and about helping people understand how to innovate. And so that's the work that I've been doing with the working backwards work. But I found that most of my customers are suddenly very much interested in the tactical how now for obvious reasons. Like what do we change right now? And it ends up being so I think there's an opportunity there, because I think practically speaking, the world's going to change so much that you then need to change your strategy and hence your product, and that needs to be driven by the customer. And the customers are changing so much right now. But that's what I've been doing. But I certainly noticed in the last couple of weeks that everything that I was working on just stopped and died. So and at the same time, I saw a lot of I've always had a passion for small businesses and helping small local businesses, and I've had an interest in the short supply chain and deglobalization and that kind of thing. And at the same time, I saw on Facebook a lot of the groups that I was on, people sort of saying, "Oh, I have a where do I get food delivered? How do I get a food delivery now? Auchan Drive is full. I don't want to go to the supermarket." And then I also saw some people who are suppliers, and I saw one guy in particular who is a meat supplier of to restaurants, and he was saying, "Well, I've got all this meat that I would normally sell to restaurants, but the restaurants are closed. Where do I sell my meat?" At the same time, people are looking for meat, and he can deliver or he can do pickup. So I thought, well, what needs to happen here is these people need to come together. We need to have connect these people. And a few other people have been thinking about the same thing. I'm thinking about it a little bit differently to what they're doing, but effectively setting up a directory, which is, these are companies that right now are available to do pickup and delivery of foodstuffs and other things. We can do, anything else. Not restaurants, because there's enough restaurant delivery sites out there, and that's a different problem. And not supermarkets, because everyone knows where the supermarkets are. But what we don't know is that Oberweis will do will let you order ahead and pick up. And what we don't know is that this egg farmer has a self-service egg place, and this milk farmer has a self-service milk place. And Let's Grow exists, and they have you can order vegetables online and go and pick them up, and all that sort of stuff. So those things we don't know about. So we're setting up a directory there. In the short term, it's going to be very much a matter of listing and letting companies list, and then just letting people know about themselves. And I figure the more people know about it, the better. And because as soon as if I'm an egg company, I tell my customers about it, well, they'll then go and buy the dairy company's products, and then the dairy company will share it, and then they'll buy the fruit company's products, and so on. So everyone benefits. Longer term, though, I think it's really interesting to turn this into a deglobalization initiative and the local supplier initiative. I think I can see a really interesting way of having a delivery process, a logistics process that could be viable, where you don't necessarily have to have the scale of supermarket to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see ways to make this, even the payments and things like that, work without having to fully digitalize these less digital companies. So that's the direction we're going in, and we're trying to make it into a community process. Also trying to make sure that it's relevant across Europe as opposed to just Luxembourg. I have a belief that most businesses need to be bigger than Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The other thing is when we look at it now, Sten, there are no questions coming on. May I ask you a little bit about what are you going to share with us next Tuesday in your workshop?
Sure. So next Tuesday is about working backwards, and working backwards is the process that Amazon uses to identify new ideas and to get the right idea to be able to invest in without having to build an entire minimal viable product. So the story here is basically that most corporates, most companies, especially the larger ones, but have a habit of, when you start doing a test or any sort of beta test, or even Google does the same thing, Apple does the same. And when you start doing any sort of test, you can't release it to the public until it's perfect. So you have to actually invest heavily in it. And if you're Google or Amazon, you have to have something that's not only perfect but scales really well, because as soon as you launch it, you get 100 million people on it, right? Whereas most companies don't have quite that problem, but they still overinvest. So the way that Amazon deals with this is that what they realize is that the difference between success and failure is really not just that when you launch it, lots of people come, but that people get excited about it. And so however you communicate it, people get excited about. And so they, and effectively the way that Amazon launches things is they put together a press release. Well, this is when you normally launch something, you write a press release. And so if you build a product and then write the press release, and then you realize when you're writing the press release that this just isn't getting people excited, it's not generating the right reaction. You might discover this when you launch it and no one cares, or when no one writes about it in the newspaper. But you can usually figure that out when you're writing it. You write down the press release and you think, how do I even express this feature? I don't know how to express this feature. And so this is what we discovered when we're doing launches. So what they did is they flipped the whole process around. They worked backwards. So you start not only are you starting mentally from the customer and working backwards to the problem, you're starting from the launch communication, and you start off with that launch communication, and you write down, well, this is what I want to launch. This is what I want to say to people. Now, when I'm writing down the thing that I want to say to people about the product, then anyone who reads it, anyone at all, can look at this and say, yes, I think that this really captures customers' problems and it solves them, and they'll be excited about it. Or no, they won't, and I can give really constructive feedback. The cost of writing this document is half a day or a few hours. So you end up with the ability to get people from across your organization to be able to write these documents and write ideas in a form that effectively is capturing the likely impact when you release it to a customer. And then you get many more ideas from people and test those ideas. And then when you're investing in them, you can focus in on the things that are in the press release, not the hobby that someone has, or the idea that someone has to restructure the database as well. And so this ends up being a way of focusing things down onto the really essential things that are really going to matter to customers, and it makes implementation cheaper.
Okay, so there are some questions popping in. One is, what would you say that you need certain personality traits to be product focused?
So to be product focused, I think that the real thing here is this mentality of a marketing scientist, right? So in that the goal here is not necessarily to focus on the product, it's to focus on the customer and what proposition you're making to the customer. And so when people focus on the product, it actually ends up being an internal focus thing, and that needs to be secondary to the focus on the customer. So what I care about is, what problems do my customers have? What's motivating them? What are they wanting to solve? And how do I get myself and my product to be such that customers find it? And when they find it, they recognize it as a solution to the problem that they want to solve. And then they decide to choose this solution over other potential solutions or not solving their problem, right? So it's really about getting into the head of the customer, and a product manager who is able to influence is basically the one who is most authoritative about the knowledge of the customer and about what we can do, how to build a product that is going to have an impact on the customer. And so in that sense, it doesn't actually matter how much you know about the product to a degree. It matters how much you know about the customer, right? And so how do you build something that has features, and you need to know enough about the product to be credible, because there's no point in just saying, like, I have one of the companies that I worked for before I came to Luxembourg had this product that was amazing, except that it was impossible. As in, we could communicate it and customers were excited about it and they'd all buy it, but then it was impossible to build. And I discovered that it was impossible to build after I joined, and discovered they hadn't built it, and it was impossible. So, you need to actually have some credibility, but at the same time, the main thing is, like, what is going to matter for these customers? And when I did my mobile loyalty product, it turns out that no one cared, and it doesn't matter how good my product was. No one has that problem, so they're not going to do anything about it. So I hope that answers the question about personality traits. So to me, it really comes down to this customer obsession, and then the action is really the scientist, like understanding what's really happening and getting data that proves something, and then I can use this data to convince other people around the organization, as opposed to having a passion and a vision. If I have a passion and a vision, it's very helpful, but I might be right, I might be wrong. I need to test this against reality.
And do you have any advice on how to be a successful disruptor in a large or established entity?
Yeah, so I've had a number of failures doing this, and I've had some successes. One of my the failure that I had that is in common with almost everyone else I know who left Amazon, Google, or other big companies and went to other companies is starting out your intention to, or even startups, starting out your intention to disrupt this conservative company by saying, well, this is how we do it at Google or at Amazon or in a startup, because the natural response is always, yeah, but that won't work here. And the funny thing is that half the time they're actually right. It won't work there. Half the time they're wrong, but you can't tell a difference and they can't tell a difference. So that means that your attempts to disrupt don't work. So what I discovered is that I really need to get into the head. If from the outside, I need to get into the head of the company, the organization that's really going on, understand their unique strengths and how those strengths have contributed to them winning the customers that they do have. Because this is the difference between an established company and a startup, is that they do have customers. People are giving them money, so they have won. They have got something. So I need to really understand that. When I spoke to a retailer, I gain credibility with them by telling them how much better at retail they are than Amazon, because they are, and they have people coming into their shop and buying things, and they're much better at getting these people to buy more things. So they're actually really, really good at this. But when they move online, they've got a problem. And then helping them understand their own peculiar talents and skills and their own, like, where they're well ahead and where they're behind, and then how do they bring this to there, as opposed to saying, you're behind here, so you just need to change because that's what Amazon's doing. That doesn't work, because it's not relevant to who they are and who their customers are and how they interact with their customers. So that's to me a big thing. The tool of working backwards has been very useful in other companies that I've had. When I've written down like a customer-facing letter, I write a letter to their customers. I don't send it to their customers, but I write a letter to say, look, this is what I would want to say to your customers if I were you. I would want to say, you have this problem, we're now solving it with this solution. It does this, right? And then they can think through what that means, and it forces them into a customer-centered mindset to look at their own business from their customer-centered, because normally they're sitting there thinking about their product, thinking about their business, thinking about their operations, but not often really seeing it from the customer's external perspective.
Okay, and then the last one, because time is running out, is regarding your project, the New Mercata.
Yeah.
Okay, up until now, such projects were not successful because providers either did not have enough digital literacy or just did not want to fill in information about them. How do you plan to cope with these problems? Just in a nutshell.
Yeah, sure. So this is obviously fun. There's actually two parts to this. One is, like, do people even look for this data online, and will they find this? Will the users find it? If you can get both sides of this working, then it starts to work. And if people find there's value in it, then they'll start to do something. Now we have to make it simple enough that they can edit their information really easily. I also think that most of them actually have some information online. It might be in a Facebook post, it might be on an editus, it might be somewhere else, but they have something online somewhere. And so this is a matter of figuring out a mechanism to scale that. How do I get this data in there to be useful to people first, and then once it's useful to people and people start using it, then I go back to the retailers and merchants and say, hey, people are using this, they're coming to you, would you like to update this? And then I've given them a leg up. And actually adding this simple data from their Facebook page takes about 3 minutes per shop. So it's not very hard. I can do that with photographs, I can do it with their business hours, and everything takes about 3 minutes. They're there, and then I have to find ways of getting consumers to there. Once I get consumers there, and I can say I have a lot of consumers using this, then I can relatively easily give them a tool. And even that 3 minutes, me doing it is not a great use of my time. So I do 100 of them, and that's like 5 hours. But I can always hire some operational people to follow a process, and then that'll be the goal, is to follow that process and to populate the database to make it useful to users. And then when users have it and they start sharing it, then it should gain momentum. And partially this really comes down to actually having ambassadors in the markets. So if someone cares about this locally, they will promote it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you to all of you for having been with us for this first virtual fireside chat on SG Virtual. And we hope to see you either next week for the workshop with Richard, or next month, or in May, June, and July, and so on. We will try to hold our events always on the second Tuesday of the month, followed by the ones the week after Tuesday on the workshop on the topic itself. So thank you to AWS for the mentorship month, to our partners, and please life to him and keep safe. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
So
thanks, Steve. Much
thank
appreciated.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So this one, share.
Can you close that? I'm still on the call. Thank you.
There's a reason
Oh,
why
it's
for the
2
last 13 years, startups
Right.
overwhelmingly prefer to build on top of AWS. We have the
Okay.
largest number of services.
So are we
do take on some of the biggest
we wrapped up
challenges
now?
with the smallest teams. We also have partnerships with the top VCs, accelerators, and incubators around the world, making it easier to secure your next round of funding.
I'm a solution architect with the AWS Start program. What we do is we work with startups in the education sector, and we help them build their services on AWS.
So We Power Tech is AWS's diversity and inclusion outreach program. The program is really twofold. One is to increase the number of underrepresented technologists within the industry, and the second is to provide a platform for them to be seen and heard.
If you're wondering how the AWS evangelist